HarperCollins presents Skulduggery Pleasant, Until the End, by Derek Landy, read by Kevin Healy. This book is dedicated to Iron Man. Tony Stark stopped Thanos and saved us all, and I, for one, will never forget the sacrifice he made. Also to Natasha Romanoff for yeeting herself off that cliff. "Welcome," she said. The faceless ones were in her soul. She felt them. An entire race of them. Hundreds of thousands? Millions? Billions? More? She had no way of knowing. The only thing she knew without question was that there were multitudes squirming and writhing within the essence of who she was. They flitted to her light, to her aura like moths, and when they were ready, they left her soul and emerged, intangible to the touch, invisible to the mortal eye. They stood on the horizons, and they waited until it was time to become solid. They were her children, and they were going to reshape the world. 1. Getting punched through a building at 16 was new and fun, and actually pretty cool. Getting punched through a building at 26 was annoying, frustrating, and when she really thought about it, kind of rude. Valkyrie picked herself up, bits of broken masonry falling from her shoulders, clouds of dust blossoming and swirling on the breeze that came through the ruined structure. She pulled the skull mask off her face, and it flowed into the hood, and she pulled that down and shook out her hair. The sorcerer hovered in the night sky above her, his arms folded, waiting for her to look up. Instead, she walked over to a piece of the collapsed roof and sat. She crossed her legs, took out her phone. The sorcerer drifted down a little, trying to catch her eye without making it look obvious. Finally, he said, "What's happening?" "I'm not fighting you," Valkyrie said. "So you surrender?" "Nope, just not fighting you." "Why not?" he asked. Her thumbs danced over the screen, replying to a message. "Because fighting is dumb," she said, and sent it off. He drifted down lower. "What do you mean?" She looked at him now. His hair was long and brown, and he had a little beard, and he wore colourful robes with intricate designs. His name was Mansell, or Mantle, or Barney or something. Is this really the best way to resolve a problem? By punching the person you're arguing with? Being powerful doesn't make you right. "Being powerful means you don't have to be right," Barney said, smiling with evil intent. Or just regular intent. Valkyrie couldn't be sure. She had a lot going on these days. Headlights swooped in as a car approached. Most people would run from a battle that had already demolished 2 houses in this construction site. It took a certain kind of person to drive towards it. A certain kind of person driving a certain kind of car. The 1924 Rolls-Royce Phantom 1 pulled up to the curb, and Skulduggery Pleasant got out. His 3-piece suit was dark blue tonight, with matching hat, and his skull reflected the orange street lamp. It was October, but Dublin was still warm. Ignoring the front door, which had miraculously survived the battle, Skulduggery stepped through a massive hole in the wall and made his way over. "Have you surrendered yet?" he asked Barney, checking the time on his pocket watch. His head tilted in annoyance, and he started winding the crown. "I'm not the one surrendering," Barney said. "I'm winning this." "You're not, though," said Valkyrie. "You're really not," said Skulduggery. "I've thrown her through 2 buildings," Barney said, with a hint, a smidge, a soupçon of exasperation in his voice. "No," Valkyrie corrected. "You've only thrown me through 1 building. I bounced off the second." "My point is," Barney continued, "I am too powerful to be stopped by the likes of you." Valkyrie raised an eyebrow. Skulduggery lifted off the ground slowly, the dust whirling beneath him. "You're too powerful for us," he said. "Too powerful for me. A man who was murdered and came back to something resembling life. A man who has saved the world from gods and monsters and the wickedest of the wicked. Too powerful for her, the woman who has gone toe-to-toe with Malevolent himself. The woman whose bad mood turned into a god that was a moment away from killing everyone on the face of the planet. The woman who, as we speak, commands thousands of faceless ones that stand, invisible to mortals, over every major city in every major country. You are too powerful for us." Barney hovered in the air. "She doesn't command them," he said quietly. "What? What was that?" "She doesn't command the faceless ones," he said, louder this time. "She brought them here, yeah, fair enough, but she's not, in charge of them or anything." Valkyrie swiped through her social media feed. "I'm the child and the mother," she muttered. She felt Barney's gaze swing back to her. "What?" "It's what they call me," she said. "I'm the child of the faceless ones because I'm descended from them, but I'm also their mother because I'm the conduit through which they must travel to this dimension." She put her phone away and looked up. "The child and the mother. See? Which means they do what I tell them." Barney licked his lips. "Why are you doing this? Why did you come after me? I didn't do anything to you." "You tried to steal some very powerful weapons for your own destructive purposes, and you killed 3 mortals doing it." "So?" Barney responded. "I thought you were, "What?" "I thought you were on our side," Barney said. "I know you were a detective, an arbiter, but haven't you changed? Like you said, you're working with the faceless ones now. You're a bad guy. Why do you care if the rest of us kill a few people?" Valkyrie sighed. "I'm not a bad guy, you idiot. My horizons may have been broadened recently, but I'm still me. I'm still an arbiter, and part of our job is to bring in murderers like you." "Why, though?" "Because murder is, totally wrong," she said, sarcastically. "But you brought the faceless ones back," Barney exclaimed, really not getting it. "The mortals don't know they're here right now, but sooner or later they'll be able to see them, and then—" Barney looked like he was running out of words, so he waved his arms around. "They'll kill them! The faceless ones will kill them! So if they're going to die anyway, why am I allowed to start off by killing a few myself?" "Barney, I don't think you're grasping the fundamentals here." "Who the hell is Barney?" "The faceless ones are love and light and peace and happiness. And if they have to kill some people, it'll be for a very good reason, and those deaths will have meaning. But you're just a dude with a little beard who got a power boost along with the rest of the sorcerers and now thinks he's a big deal. You're not a big deal, Barney. Seriously, who is this Barney person?" "Are you going to come quietly?" Valkyrie said. "Or will I have to continue beating you up?" Barney sneered. "You'll need an army to stop me." Skulduggery had drifted in behind him by that point and snaked an arm round his throat. He applied the choke before Barney knew what was happening. Barney struggled and flailed. He tried using magic, but he was panicking too much. He went red, then purple, and finally went unconscious. He fell, but Skulduggery used the air to catch him and hold him upside down. All the change fell out of his pockets. "I'll find him a nice cell in Roarhaven," Skulduggery said. "You may as well go home and feed your dog." "Yeah," said Valkyrie, letting that go without comment. "See you tomorrow." She flew to her bike, put on her helmet, and eased out onto the road. She would have loved to go home and be greeted by her dog, by the excited patter of doggy feet and that dopey grin. But Zena didn't live with her anymore. That was one of the side effects of her new status as the child and the mother. Animals didn't like being in her presence. Not even Zena, the most loyal German shepherd to ever stride this earth. Valkyrie missed her terribly, of course, and her heart physically ached whenever she thought about what she'd had to give up, so she tried not to think about it. Besides, Xena seemed happy enough to be with Militza. Valkyrie found herself on familiar streets. Glad of the distraction, she pulled up outside the site that used to house the old Waxworks Museum, and below that, the Sanctuary. It was a hotel now. She thought of the museum itself and the dark halls of musty, cobwebbed celebrities. She thought of the wax figure of Phil Lynott that stood at the secret entrance, given a kind of life through magic, and for the first time wondered if that had been sacrilege of a sort. This had been a real person, a talented man beset by his own demons, and they'd used his likeness to check passwords and open doors. It was odd, the things that occurred to her now that they had passed. Despite what she had insisted at the time, despite what Skulduggery had said, perhaps plunging into danger at 12 years old had, in fact, been astonishingly reckless and incredibly stupid. Valkyrie sat on her bike and thought of the elders, of Meritorious and Crow, and even Tome. She thought of Nefarian Serpine finding the sceptre of the ancients, charging it with his magic, then accidentally using it to destroy the Book of Names. She thought of how the sceptre had exploded when Skulduggery used it. She remembered Serpine trying to keep himself together when the black lightning struck him. She remembered how he crumbled to dust. Something flashed into her head, a memory or a thought, and it seemed hugely important in that instant. But it moved too quickly for her to latch onto. The more she tried to pin it down, the further it scrambled, until Valkyrie couldn't even be certain it had been there in the first place. She shrugged. If it was important, it had come back to her. Probably. She put her helmet back on, started the bike, and joined the easy flow of traffic. A few years after Serpine's death, Valkyrie herself had replaced the broken crystal. Hyranian, the scientists now called it, or catahedral, to use its traditional name, capable of absorbing the souls of those it destroyed to add to its strength, and used it to kill 2 of the faceless ones who'd come through at Arranmore Farm. She shook her head as she rode. She hated remembering this. Now that she understood what they truly were, she hated remembering the fact that she'd been responsible for the deaths of some of them. To get her mind off the oncoming wave of guilt and shame, Valkyrie focused on the last time she'd seen that black lightning, when the new sceptre had exploded in her hand just 5 months ago. She'd been lucky it hadn't killed Skulduggery. She'd been lucky it hadn't killed her, come to that. The only explanation she could come up with as to how she'd survived was that the universe, in all its wisdom, had needed her alive. But of course it needed her alive. Within an hour of the new sceptre exploding, she had thrown herself into the path of Creed's activation wave and had become the child and the mother of the faceless ones. Proof, Valkyrie reckoned, that this was always meant to be. She stopped at the traffic lights in Drumcondra and put her foot on the road, the engine idling. She was alone here, at the lights. No cars around. Someone was out walking their dog. The dog barked its little head off at something its owner couldn't see, but Valkyrie could. At first, Valkyrie had been the only human who could see the faceless ones standing over the cities of the world. But now all sorcerers had acclimatized to their presence, and soon the mortals would be able to see them too. And there were plenty more to come. Plenty more to emerge from Valkyrie's soul and take their place in the world. She knew each of their names, or at least a pronounceable shortened version. Sayar Naro's full name was over 800 letters long, and Ahungaron's name involved half an alphabet that no one with ears had ever heard. This one, the one towering over Dublin like a mountain of flesh and claws, folds and tentacles, bore the name Krtok, and it was beautiful. Valkyrie smiled up at it, and then the lights changed, and she rode on, towards home. 2. China woke from another bad dream, and someone was standing over her. A twist, a roll, throwing sheets aside, and China dived on the intruder and passed straight through, clutching nothing but air. She turned, the sigils on her palms burning and ready to release twin streams of energy, and the image of the old woman chuckled in the dark.
"Oh, Mother," said Solace, "you do amuse me."
Heart rate lowering, adrenaline calming, China straightened.
"Solace, my dear," she said, "it is so good to see you again. One of these days, we simply must do this in person." "So you can kill me?" Solace asked. "Or, more likely, have me killed? I know how you loathe to get your hands dirty." "Oh, I think you'll find I'm not averse to spilling a little blood if the situation calls for it."
China passed through her daughter's psychic projection, picked the jug off the bedside table, and poured herself a tumbler of water.
"What can I do for you tonight?"
she asked, before taking a sip.
"I'm here with a warning." "Oh, good. I do so adore those."
Solace smiled.
"I understand how busy you are in the resistance, struggling against Damocles' creed and all those people who so rudely helped usurp you as supreme mage. And it is endlessly entertaining watching you and your friends flail under the unstoppable wheel of fate. But I'm afraid all things must come to an end. You especially."
"Pray continue." Solace's smile hardened.
"I don't like this attitude of yours, Mother. It is almost disrespectful. Do I really have to hurt you again? Is that what it's come to?"
China took another sip and placed the tumbler back in the bedside table.
"Aren't you bored of that by now?" "Ah, but I will never get bored of hurting you. Just as I will never get bored of tormenting you with knowledge of the horrors to come. Your world, such as it is soon to come crashing down. Tell me, Mother, what do you remember of the Shalgoth from your days as a worshipper of the Faceless Ones?"
"Monsters," said China, "sent by the Faceless Ones to hunt down the Ancients when they first rebelled. The Shalgoth themselves staged a rebellion, and the Faceless Ones imprisoned them deep within the earth."
"Where they have been stirring for millennia," Solace said, "only too anxious to atone for their sins. And you are here to tell me that the Faceless Ones are about to give them that chance? They're waiting for the signal to attack. I can feel it. Their thoughts are unfathomable, alien to me, but I can sense their intention as clearly as I can see you before me. You and your little resistance friends think that creed is the problem, or obsidian, but things are far worse than you can possibly—" "You're smiling, Mother. Why are you smiling when you know I'll hurt you for it?"
"Because, my darling daughter, you seem to have forgotten who it is you're dealing with," said China, and tapped the wall. Sigils lit up all around them, and Solace gasped, hands going to her head.
"Pay attention, dear,"
China said. "Next time you want to draw somebody's attention away from your true goals, try not to be so obvious about it."
"The Shalgoth will rip you apart,"
Solace snarled. "Oh, come now. You said it yourself. You don't care about the Faceless Ones or the monsters beneath our feet. You're here to deliver a warning, are you? Since when do you deliver warnings? Threats?
Promises of pain, absolutely. But warnings? No. You just want to distract me from investigating the hosts, don't you? So the rumours must be true. I have to admit, I only half believed them. But now that I know that's what you're scared of, well, my interest is piqued.
Solace glared at her until the sigils pulsed again and the pain became too much. Her image blinked out. 3.
You're going to be late for breakfast, said Gerontius, and left the room, still fiddling with his tie.
Omen turned over in bed to lie on his stomach. He tried settling down, then flipped the pillow to the cool side and tried again. His eyes stung, and he was so tired after a night plagued by bad dreams, but he knew he wasn't going to get back to sleep. Groaning to the empty room, he turned over again, and his thoughts drifted into nonsense for a moment before he checked the time and jackknifed out of bed. He'd fallen asleep. How the hell had he fallen asleep? He'd had his eyes closed for a moment, just a tiny little moment. But that moment had gone on for half an hour, and now he was late for morning assembly, and he was still struggling to put his trousers on. Omen brushed his teeth, did his best to tame his hair, checked his face for spots. There were some new ones. Yay! Pulled on his shirt and blazer, stuffed his feet into his shoes, grabbed his tie and his phone, and ran. As he ran, he put his tie on. It was not done well. Footsteps echoing in the corridor, he sprinted to his locker, grabbed his bag, wheeled round to run on, and froze. Principal Duenna was looking at him. She said. Omen didn't know what to do. I'm late, he said. Quite, said Duenna. Mr. Darkley, we haven't had a chance to chat since the new term started. How are you coping with the loss of your brother? Omen blinked at her. He's not lost. Duenna smiled and inclined her head. I'm sorry. He cleared the croakiness from his throat. My brother isn't lost, he said. I see. Do you know where he is? No, Omen admitted. Do your parents know where he is? Do the authorities? No. Then that would appear to be the very definition of the word lost, would it not? Not really, miss. Not as long as he knows where he is. Duenna observed him. Yes, she said. I've given the teaching staff strict instructions regarding you, Mr. Darkley. You have obviously been through a great deal, and your teachers will be looking out for you. We can't let your studies lapse now, can we? I suppose not. Duenna took a small step forward. We're keeping an eye on you, Omen. We all are. Everyone's very concerned. Your behaviour last term was far from exemplary. Why, there were even calls to have you arrested. Arrested? A co-rival student arrested? She shivered. Perished the very thought. Omen nodded, but said nothing. Some of the parents are worried, Duenna continued. They've requested that you be removed from your classes. They worry that you invite trouble, that you're a bad influence. Omen said, I'm not trying to... But Duenna held up a finger. Don't interrupt me, Mr. Darkley. Right, he said. Sorry. They've been saying awful disparaging things about you and your parents and your upbringing, and especially about your brother. She shook her head. Terrible what's happened to him. Just terrible. To go from being the chosen one to being... that thing. Obsidian. It must be awful. Some people are calling him a monster, you know. In some respects, it's almost a kindness that he no longer comprehends what's happening to him. To go from hero to villain is something I doubt he could handle. He's not a villain, Omen said before he could stop himself. And we don't know what he can or cannot comprehend. We don't know anything about his condition. You sound angry, Omen. I understand that this is a difficult time, and that you're under a lot of pressure, but I'm afraid I can't allow you to take that tone with a member of staff." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." Duenna looked at him and thought for a moment. "There are some members of our faculty who didn't believe you should have been let back into the academy," she said. "You and your friends were, of course, involved in violence on school grounds. It was all very disturbing. Teachers, Omen, teachers were calling me, demanding that you be expelled, demanding that the city guard arrest you. The crimes they accused you of, terrible things. They said you were guilty of blasphemy, Omen, of working against the faceless ones. There were some who accused you of treason against Roarhaven. But of course that wasn't an actual crime when you committed it, luckily for you. But our supreme mage decided in his mercy and benevolence that you should not be punished for your many, many transgressions. It was his decision that we keep you safe and keep you close. And who are we to argue with Archcanon Creed?" Omen kept his mouth firmly shut. "But you are a challenge, Mr. Darkley. You present to me a problem. Perspicacious Rubik, my predecessor in this role of principal, left to become Ireland's Grand Mage, and he now sits on the Council of Advisors to the Supreme Mage himself. What higher calling could there be than to advise as great a man as the Supreme Mage? Once I have turned Corrival Academy into the beacon of enlightenment I know it can be, who knows the heights to which I could ascend? My point, Mr. Darkley, is that I am fully invested in the education and well-being of each and every one of my students because their success is my success. We all share the glory. Isn't that a wonderful thing? The inverse is, of course, also true. Their failures are my failures. Decisions you make and actions you take that reflect poorly on you also reflect poorly on me. My track record is exemplary. I plan on maintaining that." She looked him in the eyes, and he held her gaze until it became awkward, and he looked away. "What do you know about how this school was built?" "I know a bit," he said. "Erskine Ravel got Crayfon's signet to design the whole city so that it could be superimposed over the old town of Roarhaven." "So you have been paying attention in class," said Duenna. "What you won't have been taught is how Supreme Mage Creed got involved." "He got Mr. Signet to alter his designs," Omen said, and enjoyed seeing the surprise on Duenna's face. "He made them use the streets and buildings to form sigils so that he could send out his activation wave." Duenna's eyebrow rose a fraction. Of course you know that. How silly of me. Yes, the Supreme Mage explained to Crayfon Signet what he needed him to do. He threatened him." "The Supreme Mage doesn't threaten people, Mr. Darkley." "He threatened Mr. Signet," Omen said. "Threatened his wife." "Don't be absurd." "It's not absurd. Mr. Signet told me himself." "Crayfon Signet told you himself, did he?" "Yes, right before he was murdered." "This is no time for dramatics, Mr. Darkley." "I'm not—" "Be quiet!" Duenna snapped. Omen shut up. The principal composed herself and continued with a slight smile as if nothing had happened. "The Supreme Mage added his own details to various buildings in Roarhaven, this school being one. He foresaw obstacles to his great work. He foresaw people like the so-called resistance, the terrorists. He foresaw attacks, assassinations, attempted coups, and he planned accordingly. There is a level below ground, Mr. Darkley, that contains what can be charitably described as holding spaces." Omen frowned. "Cells?" "This is just a warning," said Duenna. "For a student with your family history, not to mention your own history of associating with known killers and criminals, The utmost care must be taken. Any detention you get will, therefore, be spent in a holding space. Do you understand? Yes, Principal Duenna. She smiled. Good. If there is anything I can do for you, Omen, any way that I could possibly help you with your current circumstances, do not hesitate to contact my secretary. Now run along. Assembly has already begun. Omen turned, walked quickly into the assembly hall, ignoring the glare from Vice Principal Noble. Filament Sclavi stepped into his path, holding out a smooth black bracelet. Here you go, he said, all smiles. Omen frowned, noting that everyone else seemed to be wearing them. What's it for? You, Filament said unhelpfully. You have to put it on before you can line up, I'm afraid. The bracelet was a black circle of what looked like cheap plastic. Omen slipped it on, and it hung loosely from his wrist, and Filament stood aside, allowing Omen to take his usual place beside Never. Never was not looking impressed at having to wear an accessory they had not personally picked out. Duenna walked on stage, gave 3 quick claps, and the assembly hall went quiet. Do you all have them on? She said, her voice loud in the silence. Everyone, raise your hands so the prefects can check. Hands went up. Omen and Never shared a look, and reluctantly did likewise. The prefects marched up each row, and when they got to the top, they called out, Aye! Excellent, said Duenna, and took a slim piece of that same black plastic from her jacket. She tapped it twice, and the students' bracelets tightened and clicked. Omen didn't like that. It felt way too much like handcuffs. You may be wondering why you have each been given a stylish piece of school-approved jewellery, Duenna said, briefly wearing something that resembled a smile. You may also be wondering if this means our uniform policy has been relaxed. It has not. The bracelets you now all wear round your wrists cannot be removed, and they are for your own protection. Omen frowned amid the mumblings and mutterings, and tried to open the bracelet. He couldn't even detect a seam. In these uncertain times, precautions need to be taken. There have always been limits on the types of magic students are allowed to wield on school grounds, but to that list we are adding teleportation. Omen glanced at Never, saw them stiffen. Teleportation without supervision is simply too dangerous and too unpredictable. As such, these bracelets have been fitted with restriction sigils. Duenna pressed the remote control in her hand, and every bracelet chirped lightly as a sigil flashed up on its surface. You can't do that, someone said, and the hall echoed with shouts of outrage. Duenna clapped 3 times again, but the outrage continued. Another 3 claps, accompanied now by a look of absolute fury, and the shouting gradually reduced to mere mutterings. We can indeed do exactly that, Duenna said. Your parents or guardians were each contacted by a member of the Committee of Well-Being, set up as a joint venture between Corrival Academy and the Church of the Faceless. Each of them acquiesced. I understand that some of you may have bought into the idea of teenage rebellion, so I shall overlook that outburst this one and only time. But believe me when I say that the grown-ups know what's best for you. Any further disruption will result in immediate detention. Does anyone want to test me on that? She watched them all, alert for any further signs of discontent. Binding another sorcerer's magic is illegal, one of Omen's fellow 6th-years said, unable to help herself. It's written into the Roarhaven Constitution. Duenna pointed. Detention, she said. 2 prefects marched forward, grabbed the 6th-year's arms, and escorted her out of the hall. When the doors had swung shut behind them, Duenna continued. The restriction sigils do not bind your magic, she said. They merely scramble the signals that go to your brain. The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy with words unsaid. "It's all very non-invasive," Duenna continued. "Let me assure you, your well-being is our top priority. We live in a dangerous world where not everyone can agree on the wisest course of action. But the staff here at Corrival Academy and the High Sanctuary of the city of Roarhaven have faith on our side, and the knowledge that what we are doing is good and just and right. Trust in us, children, and we will guide you to the new world." She smiled.
"This," Never whispered, "can only end badly."
4. Valkyrie didn't need to sleep that much lately, so she lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. Whenever a flutter of anxiety rose from her belly to her chest, she glanced through the open curtains towards Dublin. Even at this distance, 30 kilometres away, she was unable to see Curtalk's head, though in the moonlight she could see the tendrils that swayed from the underside of his jaw. Every time she saw him, she relaxed and smiled, and felt herself flooded with love. She watched the lights of a distant plane disappear behind his immense mass, and wondered if those passengers could feel, in some way, that they were passing through the incorporeal body of a god. Were the hairs standing up on the backs of their necks? Did they suddenly feel as if they were being watched? Were they suddenly nauseous or paranoid? Or were they struck with migraines or thoughts of violence and chaos? Were arguments breaking out on that plane even now? Were old grievances reigniting? The effects the Faceless Ones had on mortals were known to be unsettling, and that was deeply, deeply unfortunate. But once the truth came out, the world would be a better place. Valkyrie believed that with every single part of who she was. When morning came, she took the M50 past Dublin, overtook a few tractors on quiet country roads, and rode by half a dozen signs advising her to turn round and try another route. The old man in the tired old shack nodded to her as she navigated the potholes on the dirt road that seemed to lead to nowhere. Beyond him, she rode through the cloaking bubble, and the city of Roarhaven appeared before her like a flower opening its petals. The cleavers standing at Shudder's gate watched her as they watched everyone, and she continued on through Old Town and into the Circle Zone, where she took the ramp down to the car park underneath the High Sanctuary. Her phone beeped as she hung her helmet off the bike's handlebars. She read the message, activated the Necronaut suit to protect her clothes while she flew, and took off. Leaving a trail of energy behind her, she followed the ramp back outside and blazed across the city, meeting Skulduggery at the crime scene. The apartment was open and airy, lots of light. The armchair was turned over on its side, and there were pieces of broken sculptures across the floor. A framed painting, A Summer's Evening on the Docks, had been dislodged. It slumped against the wall at an angle, like an old man needing a rest. "This is where Mr. Ecru died?" Valkyrie asked. The woman, a large woman with magnificent bone structure and red shoes, nodded. "Right where you're standing," she said. "Where I'm standing right now? Literally where I'm standing?" "Literally." Valkyrie reached out with her thoughts, but couldn't find any hint of trauma in the space around her. There was, however, an absence of trauma, or the absence of anything, really, as if the space had been scrubbed clean before her arrival. "Tell me about him," Valkyrie said. The woman took a breath and let it out with a shrug. "He was a nice man, I suppose. He paid his rent on time. He didn't make any trouble. He never bothered the other tenants. Don't you want to know about the thing that killed him?" "We know about the thing that killed him," Skulduggery said, emerging from the room behind her. He had a book in his hands, leather-bound and thick, that he placed on the side table as he passed. Approximately 6 foot tall, by all appearances male, with pitch-black, rock-hard skin.
Obsidian, said the woman. They're calling him Obsidian. They worship him, you know.
Valkyrie frowned. Who does?
The fanatics. I've seen them at night, going around in groups, telling people that the end is nigh, all that kind of malarkey. I mean, people have been saying that the end is nigh for centuries, so I don't put much stock in it myself, but even so.
When you heard the victim shouting, Valkyrie said, what did you do?
I grabbed my keys and ran up the stairs and let myself in.
You ran towards the sound of danger?
I suppose I did.
That's very brave of you, said Valkyrie.
The woman shrugged.
And when you entered the apartment, said Skulduggery, what did you see?
I saw Mr. Accrew backing away from him. From Obsidian. Mr. Accrew was knocking things over, throwing things.
What was Obsidian doing?
He just walked towards him. One of the pieces of art there, the sculpture, it hit him. Hit Obsidian right in the face, and he didn't even flinch. Then he reached out, just with a fingertip, and touched Mr. Accrew's chest, and he... I don't know how to describe it. I've seen people disappear before. My husband, rest his soul, was a teleporter, but this wasn't like that. Mr. Accrew kind of... She frowned, searching for the words. The space swallowed him.
The books in his bedroom, Skulduggery said, not giving the woman time to lapse into the numbing shock she was clearly circling, indicate that Mr. Accrew was a worshipper of the Faceless Ones.
The woman nodded. Yes, indeed.
Would you say he was devout?
Oh, I would. He was a good man.
She smiled nervously at Valkyrie.
A good, kind-hearted, devout man.
Valkyrie smiled back. That's good to hear. So, at least in his dying moments, he was comforted by his faith.
Did he pray?
Skulduggery asked, pulling the woman's attention back to him.
Pray? Yes, of course.
Did he pray much? Did he pray loudly?
Not loudly, said the woman. He didn't chant or anything like that. He didn't sing the hymns, but he prayed. I know he prayed.
How do you know he prayed?
She frowned. I'm not sure. He seemed the type.
Skulduggery looked at her, his head tilted to one side. Then he nodded. I'd agree with you. He did seem the type. But he didn't pray loudly, you say. That's interesting. What about you? Do you pray?
Yes,
the woman said immediately. And are you devout?
I am.
Have you always been devout?
She went pale.
She kept her eyes on Skulduggery, didn't even glance at Valkyrie.
I have become more devout in my later years.
And in your earlier years? He asked. He took his hat off, placed it on the back of an armchair, and looked at himself in the mirror above the fireplace.
I worshipped in my own way.
Skulduggery brushed imaginary dust from the top of his skull. So, you weren't a member of the Church of the Faceless?
Not an official member, no.
Were you a member of the Legion of Judgment?
No. Dear me, no. Terrible people.
Yet they share the majority of your beliefs, do they not? Skulduggery pressed.
Our beliefs,
Valkyrie corrected. The Legion of Judgment shared the majority of our beliefs, said Skulduggery. They believe that the Faceless Ones are the true gods of humankind, who bore witness to the fire of creation as recounted in the Book of Tears. The woman nodded quickly. But the Legion of Judgment followed Malevolent's teachings, Skulduggery continued, while the Church of the Faceless has been guided by Damocles' Creed. Supreme Mage Damocles' Creed, Valkyrie said. Archcanon Damocles' Creed. Our boss, Skulduggery said, his tone curiously gentle. And this is the church you belong to, yes? Yes, said the woman, but only as of recently. The woman swallowed. Yes. Valkyrie smiled. You don't have to worry. The woman's gaze flickered to her, and Valkyrie saw genuine terror in those eyes. Valkyrie hurried towards her and held her hands. Oh, no! No, I don't mean to scare you. You really do have nothing to fear from me. As the child of the faceless, I'm just the conduit through which they're entering our world. It's a wonderful thing, actually, although I totally understand why it'd be intimidating. But they're not here to punish you, and I'm not here to hurt you. The faceless ones are love. They're love and forgiveness and acceptance. They're here to guide us out of the muck. That's why I've been chosen. I'm the child of the faceless ones, but also their mother, and I could never, ever hurt anyone who loves them like I do. Valkyrie, Skulduggery said. She looked back at him, smiling. Yes? He nodded to her hands, and she looked down, realized she had taken hold of the woman's wrists and had crushed them in her grip. She released them at once, and the woman gasped, staggered back, tears already running down her face. I'm sorry, Valkyrie said, appalled. I am so sorry. Are you okay? I am so dreadfully sorry. I can fix these. I can. I just need to be around a healer, and then I'll be able to... I'll take care of this, said Skulduggery, coming forward. Reverie's clinic is nearby. I can take her there faster. But with me, her journey will be less jarring. He guided the crying woman to the window. Stay here. Keep looking around. I won't be a minute. The window opened, and Skulduggery lifted off the ground, taking the woman with him, and they floated through and rose up out of sight. Valkyrie looked at her hands. She hadn't even been aware of the force she'd been exerting. She frowned. Or had she? There had been a sound, a crack, and even a sudden sharp inhalation as the woman drew in the breath she'd need to scream, then stopped herself, preferring to suffer in silence than risk antagonizing someone she was clearly petrified of. All this was clear in Valkyrie's memory, and yet in the moment she had happily ignored it all. That was odd. That was odd and unsettling. She had changed. She knew that. Ever since she'd intercepted the activation wave before it could reach her sister, ever since she had become the child of the faceless ones in Alice's place, the old Valkyrie had disappeared. The Valkyrie who doubted and fretted and feared. The Valkyrie who obsessed over her own failings and flaws, who had allowed her regret for past actions to permeate everything she was. That person had been swept away by the light and the love of the dark gods. Her old self, the person she used to be, had been a sliver of who she was now. A facet. Valkyrie Kane, detective and arbiter, had been the tip of the iceberg that rose above sea level. Valkyrie Kane, child and mother of the faceless ones, was the whole thing, the mountain of ice that lay heavy and solid beneath the freezing waters. But Valkyrie was still Valkyrie. She still loved and cared and wanted to help. She didn't want to hurt anyone, at least not anyone who didn't deserve it. The woman hadn't deserved the hurt. She hadn't deserved to have her wrists broken. She probably hadn't, anyway. There were thousands of sorcerers, tens of thousands around the world, who had only recently become converts, and only then because Damocles' creed had made the worship of the faceless ones mandatory for citizenship of Roarhaven. That's not how Valkyrie would have done it. She believed each sorcerer, and eventually the mortals too, should find their own way to the truth and the light. But then she wasn't in charge. She was the child and the mother, and had no interest in leading a world. Let creed shoulder that burden. The air whispered, and Skulduggery glided back through the window. "How is she?" Valkyrie asked. "Is she okay? She understands, right, that I didn't mean to do it?" Skulduggery walked by. "Do you care?" "What? Of course I care."
"She's not a believer."
"She prays? She worships?"
"Not by choice. Not because she wants to."
Valkyrie hesitated. "You're sure?"
Skulduggery picked up his hat. Mason Crew was a believer, like the 5 others that Obsidian has, for want of a better term, killed. He worshipped the Faceless Ones. He wasn't anyone special.
"Everyone is special in the eyes of the Faceless Ones," Valkyrie reminded him.
"Of course,"
Skulduggery said, after an almost unnoticeable hesitation.
"I mean, he held no great office or title. He worshipped, but he wasn't one of the Dark Cathedral's priests. He was just an ordinary sorcerer who happened to love and worship the Faceless Ones. And that's why Obsidian killed him. Due to the random nature of these attacks, I think it's probably that Obsidian was literally in the neighborhood when he picked up on a crew's prayers."
"But he didn't pray out loud."
Skulduggery put his hat on, tilting it lower over his left eye socket, which would suggest Obsidian has a highly developed psychic ability. He sensed the thoughts of a worshipper, and he came to wipe him from reality.
"That's why you think the landlady was lying about being a devout worshipper," Valkyrie said. "Obsidian didn't go for her because he read her mind. He knew she was faking it."
"Indeed."
Valkyrie sighed. "Well, at least now I don't have to feel bad about hurting her wrists."
"Why is that?"
"She's a liar."
"So that means it's okay for you to break her bones?"
"Of course not. It's just—"
"It's just what?"
No, we're not doing this. We're not having another argument about this."
"What do you think I'm going to say?"
"I don't know, Skulduggery. Probably something about how I only care about the people who worship, when we both know that isn't true. I care about everyone. I care about all sorcerers and all mortals. I'm the child and the mother of the Faceless Ones. I have to love everyone."
"But you love the sorcerers who pray to your children more, yes?"
"Are you intentionally picking a fight?"
"We're not fighting."
"It sounds like we are."
"If we were fighting," Skulduggery said, "then we'd be on opposing sides. But we're not. I'm beside you, like I've always been. You became the child of the Faceless Ones, and I could have walked away. But I didn't."
"You've just stayed because you love me."
"Yes."
"Not because you love the Faceless Ones."
"Are you so sure about that? Can you reach into my thoughts and see my truth?"
Valkyrie smiled. "I would if I could."
"But you can't. So you're just going to have to take my word that I've opened myself up to the possibility that the Faceless Ones will not bring death and destruction to innocent people."
She looked at him and laughed. "Creed would love to turn your bones to dust."
"Yes, he would," said Skulduggery, lifting off the ground. "But while I've got you by my side, he won't touch me, will he?"
"No, he won't. But he will hunt down the others. I mean, you realize that, yeah? China and Tanith and Temper and every other member of the Resistance. He'll find them eventually, and he'll have one public execution after another."
"I'm well aware of what he'll do if he catches them."
"And you're okay with that? You'll just stand by and let it happen?"
"That's not the question, though, is it?"
Skulduggery asked, drifting out through the open window.
"The question is, will you?"
5. The Dark Cathedral stood like some evil wizard's palace in an old Disney movie, the kind that should have been perched on the edge of a forbidding cliff, its black stones lit up by the hands of forked lightning reaching down out of the clouds. Instead, it stood in the bright sunshine, occupying the eastern edge of the circle zone in the middle of Roarhaven, a sulking, spiked counterpart to the taller, more handsome High Sanctuary. Looks, as ever, were deceptive, as the cold darkness of the cathedral had been infiltrating the high sanctuary for months, corrupting it from the inside out. The sanctuary agents and operatives, who didn't share a deep and abiding love for the faceless ones, were quitting one by one, leaving every institution of authority under the control of either the Church of the Faceless or the City Guard, which amounted to much the same thing. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, and there was a long line of people waiting to worship in the cathedral. They stared at Valkyrie as she walked by. She was used to it. People in Roarhaven had always stared at her, whether it was because of Darkess and Devastation Day, or whether it was because of her new status as the mother of their gods. It all resulted in wide eyes, terrified whispers, and some actual crying. She was so done with it all, she didn't even smile at them anymore. She entered the cathedral and walked to the desk. "He in?" she asked. Valkyrie had been the child and the mother for 5 months now, and the cathedral staff, the true believers who really should have known better, still had a tendency to drop to their knees when she neared. The public's reaction was bad enough. This was ridiculous. "The Archcanon is in his office!" someone squeaked from the floor. "Cheers," she said, and flew upwards, leaving a trail of crackling white energy as she zipped past floor after floor, coming to the top and dropping down onto the walkway. The guards opened the doors for her, and she strode in. Creed's office used to be a shrine to minimalism. The floor-to-ceiling windows didn't have curtains. The walls were decorated with nothing but heavy rusted chains, and the only pieces of furniture in the room were the desk and the straight-backed chair behind it. But now the office was dominated by a large table littered with machine parts, wires, coils, and casings. Cables covered the floor, lying across each other like dead snakes, hooked up to various lights and tools and computers that whirred and beeped and hummed. Valkyrie could put a car engine back together, build a motorbike from scratch, and knew how to rewire a house and defuse all but the most complicated of bombs. But she hadn't a clue what most of this junk was, and cared not one bit. All she knew was that Creed was obsessed with building what he called a Nexus helmet, a means of communicating personally with the dark gods. At first, she'd thought he was merely jealous. Yes, the Faceless Ones had been reaching people through their dreams for the last few months, driving dozens mad and encouraging dozens more to hunt down and murder random people in their neighbourhoods for various acts of blasphemy. But the only person they could talk to who could talk back was Valkyrie. For the Archcanon of the Church of the Faceless, she'd thought, this was unacceptable. Creed, it seemed, had a desperate fear of missing out. But she'd changed her mind in the last week or so. Now she didn't think it was merely jealousy that drove him. She suspected it might be something deeper. She was the child and the mother, the Faceless One's favourite human, but she couldn't help but feel that Damocles Creed didn't quite trust her. This thought amused Valkyrie no end. "How's it coming along?" she asked, more out of politeness than any real interest. Creed put down the goggles and the blowtorch, sweat shining on his bald head, drenching his cotton shirt. The air stank of burning metal. "It proceeds," he said, wiping his face with a towel. There was a man helping him, a sensitive called Robert Skewer, Bob to his friends, who gazed at Valkyrie like a lovesick idiot. The Nexus helmet was a bizarre device with copper and brass towers. It was upended, and she could see all the wires and circuitry on the inside. It looked complicated and uncomfortable, but she didn't want to say that. Didn't want to be rude. "Looks rubbish," she said instead. "Thank you, Mr. Skewer," Creed said, doing his usual wonderful job of ignoring her taunts. "That will be all." He wasn't any fun, was Damocles Creed. Not like Skulduggery. Skewer nodded quickly, smiled at Valkyrie and blushed, then hurried out of the room. What an odd little man. Obsidian has killed someone else, she said, picking up a piece of something and examining it. Or, wiped him from reality. Who was it this time? Some dude. Creed took his shirt off, bunched it up, and used it to wipe beneath his armpits. Your daily briefings have become less detail-oriented as the months have passed. She sighed. Some dude named Mason Accrew. He's a member of the church. Another one. Looks like Obsidian's targeting worshippers. You are going to put that back on, are you? Your shirt? He ignored her question and asked one of his own. How is he choosing his victims? We haven't confirmed it, but Skulduggery thinks Obsidian might be psychic. He passes by, he hears particularly loud thoughts, and he pops in to erase someone's existence. So long as those thoughts are in favour of the faceless ones. Looks like it. We might have a prejudiced serial killer on our hands. Like serial killers aren't bad enough already, right? And Detective Pleasant, once again, chose not to deliver this report alongside you. I worry. Do you now? I think he might be a subversive. She laughed. Of course he's a subversive. It's Skulduggery Pleasant we're talking about. Subversives are to be put to death. That is the law. That law doesn't apply to Skulduggery. Your fondness for him is admirable, the way fondness for an unruly dog is. But are you entirely sure he's worth the effort? You're not killing him, because you believe you share a bond, yes? With everything you've been through, with your friendship, you believe this bond is unbreakable. Valkyrie, you're young, and so take it from me when I tell you that nothing is unbreakable. Maybe once, years ago, Skulduggery would have sacrificed the world for you. But do you really think that's true anymore? He wouldn't hurt me. I believe he would, because the Valkyrie Kane he knows would never forgive him if he chose her over others. I am the Valkyrie Kane he knows. No, you're not. She went to the window, gazing up at Cartalk as it stood over Dublin City. You're not killing him, she repeated. I may have to, said Creed. Then I'll kill you. You don't believe in killing people. Valkyrie looked at him. Get me mad enough, Damocles, and you'll see what I believe. He returned her gaze for a long moment, and then nodded. Of course. Whatever the child and mother of the faceless ones wants. So glad we agree. Now then, seeing as how Obsidian seems to have a thing for killing the members of your congregation, maybe it'd be an idea to pause with the worshipping and stuff. Maybe tell them to think about other things until we find a way to stop them from getting erased. I don't think that will be necessary. The faithful are willing to die for their beliefs. I noticed you haven't asked their opinion on that. Because I don't have to. You're putting the whole of Roarhaven in danger. The dangers of the flesh pale in comparison to the dangers of the soul, Valkyrie. Besides, I have every confidence that you and your pet skeleton will stop Obsidian before many more lives are lost. If you can't, after all, then who can? 6. It's not easy, said Bennett Troth, worshipping someone who's probably going to kill you. He kept his voice down because the others were sleeping, but it really didn't make any difference. There was always someone talking or shouting or begging or crying down here, down in the dungeons beneath the city guard headquarters. In the cell across from them, there was a man who screamed himself hoarse every morning. I don't know why we do it, Bennett continued. Sometimes I think we're all quite mad. Maybe we've been mad for years, Since Devastation Day, when Darkess levelled half the city and we got our first real glimpse of an actual god. Sebastian lay on his bunk, eyes focused on the end of the beak of his plague doctor's mask, and grunted a response. He'd had this conversation before. It was one of Bennett's favourites. When he had nothing left to talk about, he would always start wondering about his own sanity. Sebastian couldn't blame him. They'd been down here since June, and the only charge levelled at them so far was of being members of an illegal organisation. Sebastian doubted that the Darkess Society was illegal. It had a grand total of 6 living members, and no one else even knew it existed. He knew why they were down here, though, and it wasn't because they posed a threat to anyone. They were insurance, or maybe a human shield, in case Darkess escaped wherever they were keeping her. Sebastian had found, as the weeks had turned into months, that he cared less for his own circumstances, which were, to be honest, too dreary and mundane to bother fretting over, and more for the current well-being of Darkess, whom Commander Hawk had dragged away, bound and unconscious. He worried about her constantly. A concrete ball had formed in his stomach, like a tiny, heavy planet with its own gravitational pull, and had caught every other thought in his head and dragged it down so that he was incapable of thinking about anything else. Darkess was not his biological daughter, and due to her rapid aging until she hit 26, he'd only had to take care of her for a matter of weeks. But there was still some part of him that demanded that she be protected from harm at all costs, and that part had been tortured every single day since they'd been captured. Bennett started praying, his mutterings like the faint dripping of water. The other members of the Darkess Society also spent a good portion of their day praying to Darkess. Sebastian didn't pray. He just worried. Bennett finally fell asleep, and Sebastian dozed. Midway through the night, he turned over to gaze upon the brickwork of the wall next to him, and jerked back so suddenly he fell off his bunk. Instead of a patch of empty ground between Sebastian and the wall, there was now a blanket, and upon that blanket lay a figure, stirred now by Sebastian's reaction. An old man with long grey hair, as straggly as his long grey beard, sat up and blinked at Sebastian through the gloom. "You look like a bird," the old man said in a thick Kerry accent. "Do you sound like a bird? Say something to me, and try not to squawk. What kind of bird are you? Do you lay eggs? I'd quite like some eggs. I haven't had eggs in a long, long time." Sebastian checked behind him as he stood. None of the others had woken. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice down. The old man got to his feet. He was dressed in rags, and his coat looked as old as he was. "Name's Flibberty-Gibbet Bedfellow, though you can call me Nuncle if you want. Everyone does. Everyone who knows me, and everyone does know me, even if they don't know they know. I would digress, but I'd never be able to find my way back. You're a curious-looking thing. Were you born with that face?" "It's a mask," said Sebastian, tapping the nose. Nuncle laughed. "I know that, lad. You're wearing a mask. I'm wearing a mask. We're all wearing our masks. But were you born with yours?" No." "You have quite a beak." "Yeah. I didn't hear them bring you in." "Didn't hear who?" "The guards. I didn't hear them chain you up." Nuncle nodded. "They must have been very quiet." "You don't remember?" "I was a million miles away," Nuncle said, putting his fingertips to his temple and fluttering his hand in the air. "Can I ask you a question, boy?" "Sure." "Good," said Nuncle. "You should never be afraid of questions. That's what my mother used to tell me whenever I got chased home by a pack of them. Course, back when I was a lad, questions were a different sort. They had teeth, and they snatched little children and ate them up like crunchy apples. Right, Sebastian said slowly. What did you do? To get thrown in here, I mean. What did you do wrong? The old man frowned. I don't rightly know. I'm not sure I did anything. Or maybe I did everything. Sure, how are you meant to know these days? Time makes a fool of us all, does it not? I suppose. Are we going to be friends, then? I suppose. Well, that's good news, said Nuncle, smiling. You can never have too many friends. He lay back, and before Sebastian could ask him anything else, he went to sleep. 7. A torn piece of paper skittered by on the breeze, and Omen curled his fingers, and the breeze diverted the paper into his hand. Feeling pretty good about managing that move without blasting himself with a gust of wind, he scrunched the paper up and tossed it into the recycling bin next to the bench. Feeling absolutely astonished that he had managed that without missing, the promise of an amazing day where everything went right was shredded by Filament Sclavi appearing before him, his prefect badge shining. You can't help it, can you? Filament asked with a smile that was not technically unkind, but which was loaded with an as yet unknown agenda. Sorry? Omen said, looking up at him, but making no move to stand. Do you even realize it when you do it, I wonder? Filament said. Or is it unconscious? Is it such a part of you that you have no idea it's even there? Well, I have no idea what we're talking about, if that's any use to you. Are you trying to make up for what's happening with Augur? Everyone knows that the Chosen One brand is very important to your family. Is that what it is? Are you trying to be the hero now that Augur's the bad guy? Omen's chest tightened, but he said nothing. Filament pointed to a first year picking up rubbish across the courtyard. Cleaning up the litter is what he's doing. It is a punishment. You know this concept? The definition of punishment is the infliction of a penalty as a retribution for an offence. It is meant to be a burden on the transgressor of this offence, and nobody else. Do you understand this? I'm still dealing with the fact that you went to the trouble of looking up and memorizing the definition of the word punishment, to be honest. If you help someone with their punishment, it is no longer their punishment. What did he do? That is no concern of yours. Are you even allowed to punish first years? You're not a teacher. Under the new code of conduct for prefects, introduced by Principal Duenna, I am allowed to punish any student for certain transgressions. Like what? Filament folded his arms. Disrespect, for one. Authority must be maintained. That is one of Principal Duenna's guiding rules. If the students don't respect the prefects, order crumbles and chaos reigns. Order's on pretty shaky grounds already if a little cheekiness could topple it. Principal Duenna gave instructions to send you to her office if you disrespected us. Did you know that? Really? You're going to send me to the principal's office? Not yet, Filament said. He started walking. Come with me. Omen watched him without moving. When it became obvious that Omen was staying where he was, Filament stopped, sighed, and turned. Mr. Darkly, he repeated, like he was calling a dog to heel. Omen just smiled and waved, and walked the other way. Hurrying footsteps, and then Filament was standing in front of him. Filament, Omen said. What's up? I told you to follow. You did, yeah. Then follow, Mr. Darkly. We don't have to be so formal, Filament. You can call me Omen. Another theatrical sigh. Omen, follow. Why? Because I told you to. Getting someone to follow you isn't one of your prefect powers, though, is it? I never said that it was. Then I'm not going to follow you. I have something to show you. What is it? Come with me, and you'll see. You sound like you're going to take me on a tour of your chocolate factory. Filament frowned. I don't understand. You sound like you're going to break into song and take me on a tour of your... Never mind. What do you want to show me, Filament? You will have to see for yourself. I think I'll wait and see it later. But you need to see it. I don't really, though, do I? Omen, said Filament, taking a deep breath. I'm asking you to come with me. I have something to show you. I don't want to tell you what it is, because I want it to be a surprise. You're not going to like it, but believe me when I tell you that you need to see it. He bristled. Please. Will it take long? No. I have somewhere to be. It'll only be a few minutes. Okay. They made their way towards the stairs. I was lying, Omen said. I don't have anywhere to be. They went outside, walked up to the school gates, and Filament checked his watch. Going to tell me what the big surprise is? Omen asked. No, said Filament. But it should be here any second. Can I ask a question? Now that we're alone and everything. Do you like being a prefect? Of course. Why, though? Everyone hates the prefects. They hate us because they fear us. You're thinking of the X-Men. Everyone hates prefects because you're a bunch of narcs. Filament frowned. What's a narc? Oh, it's someone who turns you into the authorities whenever you do the slightest thing wrong. Yes, said Filament, because we're like the secret police. That's really not it. It's way less cool. I like being a prefect because it means I can serve my school and my city, said Filament. It means I can serve the faceless ones, even in small ways. Like giving detention to little kids who don't know the rules? Yeah, that's really helping the faceless ones. That's really proving your worth there. Filament looked at him. You think you're on the right side, but you're not. You think you're one of the heroes, but you're not. The funny thing is, it's too late for you to change, and it wouldn't do you any good anyway. Omen patted him on the shoulder. I'm going to head off now, dude. Have a nice time standing here. Wait, said Filament, eyes on a car that was pulling up outside the gate. He's here. Omen had to admit he was curious as to who it was who'd got Filament so excited, so he stayed still while the car idled. It was a nice car, big and expensive, with tinted windows. Finally, a door opened, and Yennen Ispulin got out. Omen's insides went cold and plummeted. They let him out, Filament informed him gleefully. Yennen's father, he is the Bulgarian Grand Mage. You know that, right? He's been trying to get Yennen released from prison, but China Soros kept saying no. She probably thought Yennen was too much of a threat and that you personally would be in danger. I don't think Supreme Mage Creed cares about that a whole lot. Yennen saw them, his eyes fixing on Omen, and he came over. Hello, Yennen, Filament said brightly. Yennen ignored him and kept his eyes on Omen. He leaned in, and Omen resisted the urge to lean away. I'm going to kill you, Yennen said into Omen's ear, and then looked at him again before walking away. Filament laughed and clapped. This, he said, has been so much fun.